Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. You're just convenient. Not exciting. That's what she said before she walked out. No hesitation, no crack in her voice. Just that line, like she was reading a memo she'd been waiting months to deliver. I stood there frozen, holding my coffee mug, while she zipped her suitcase in the bedroom we once called ours. And then she was gone. No fight. No begging. Just the sound of her heels fading down the driveway like I was the landlord she no longer needed. At first, I tried to make sense of it. Was it stress? Some midlife crisis she couldn't put into words? But then I replayed her tone. Not broken. Not lost. Cold. Final. She didn't leave because she was hurting. She left because she thought she could do better. She thought she was walking into freedom. The silence in the house was brutal at first. The empty closet. The half of the bed that stayed untouched. The mornings where I drank my coffee alone, no sound but the hum of the fridge. But then something strange happened. The quiet started to feel like oxygen. I wasn't drowning anymore. I wasn't begging for crumbs. I was breathing on my own for the first time in years. She thought she'd left me behind in pieces. Instead, I started rebuilding. I went back to the gym, put in more hours at work, reconnected with parts of myself I'd buried under her indifference. People noticed. Friends said I looked sharper. Coworkers said I seemed lighter. The truth? I was no longer orbiting a woman who saw me as background noise. Weeks passed without a word. And then came the call. Late at night. Her name on the screen after all that silence. I almost let it ring out, but curiosity won. Her voice was careful, measured. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. She went straight to it. Her money had run out. Rent was due. She needed help. She had left because she didn't want to touch me. But now, with her pockets empty, she remembered the man she once called dependable. She thought she could just flip the switch, summon me back like I was still hers to command. I didn't give her that satisfaction. I let the silence stretch, made her repeat herself. I could hear the edge of panic in her voice, the faint tremor of someone who suddenly realized independence comes with a price. She was waiting for me to jump in, to rescue her like I always did. But I wasn't that man anymore. When I finally spoke, my words were simple, flat, almost cold. I'll think about it. Then I hung up. No comfort. No promises. Just silence. She didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. I wasn't her safety net anymore. I was the one cutting the rope. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without turning over to an empty space, wondering what I had done wrong. Because I finally understood, her leaving wasn't the end of me. It was the beginning. The first time I ignored her, she tried to play it cool. A text the next morning, short and casual, like she was talking to a coworker. Hope you're doing okay. Nothing more. No apology. No acknowledgement of the words that cut me down weeks ago. Just a polite line tossed like bait. I read it twice, set the phone down, and walked away. No reply. The silence did more damage than any paragraph I could have written. By the second day, another message came. Let me know if you need anything. That one made me laugh. She had walked out on me because she didn't want to touch me, because I wasn't exciting enough, and now she was offering me support. The irony burned, but I kept my response the same. Nothing. Silence has a weight to it, a pressure that grows with each unanswered attempt. And by the third day, she couldn't hide it anymore. The next call came in the middle of my lunch break. I let it ring until the screen went dark. She called again, immediately. And again. By the fourth attempt, I picked up, not out of kindness, but to hear the crack in her voice. Her tone was tight, rehearsed at first, but I could hear the panic leaking through. She said she was struggling to cover her bills. She mentioned her car breaking down, her hours at work being cut. Each sentence was more desperate than the last, like someone pulling threads that wouldn't hold. I listened. Not a word from me. Just the sound of her unraveling on the other end. When she finally stopped, waiting for me to jump in, I gave her the same steady line I had before. I'll think about it. Then I hung up. No comfort. No rescue. Just the echo of her own choices ringing back at her. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the glow of the TV painting shadows across the walls, and I realized something. She had built her new life on the belief that I would always be here as her backup plan. She thought she could walk out, explore her freedom, and then come crawling back when reality hit. She had underestimated the quiet strength of a man who has already let go. By the end of that week, she showed up at the house. No call this time, no warning. Just the sound of her car in the driveway and a knock at the door she used to walk through without thinking. I opened it and saw her standing there, dressed down, tired, her eyes flicking past me into the house like she expected to still belong here. I didn't step aside. I didn't invite her in. I just leaned against the doorframe, calm and still, and waited. The silence stretched between us until she finally whispered that she just wanted to talk. But talking was for the man she left behind. And he wasn't here anymore. When she showed up at the door, I could see the cracks she had tried so hard to hide. The makeup was light, but it couldn't cover the exhaustion in her eyes. Her shoulders were tense, her voice soft, almost pleading as she asked if we could just sit down for a few minutes. I let her stand there, shifting uncomfortably, before I finally stepped aside. Not as an invitation, but as a test. She walked in like a guest, not a wife. Her eyes lingered on the furniture, the photos that were no longer on the walls, the subtle rearrangements I had made since she left. It wasn't her home anymore, and she knew it. She sat on the edge of the couch, back straight, hands folded, like she was preparing for a negotiation. I stayed standing, arms crossed, letting the silence speak louder than any words. She started talking, careful, measured, circling around the point. Things hadn't gone the way she expected. Expenses piled up, people she thought she could rely on had turned out unreliable. She mentioned her job, her apartment, the bills stacking against her. She tried to dress it up as independence being harder than she thought. But the truth was written all over her face. She was drowning, and I was the only lifeline she could think to reach for. I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort. I just let her spill every detail, every subtle confession of failure. And when she finally stopped, waiting for me to offer her the same safety I always had, I simply nodded once. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. She shifted in her seat, her confidence draining, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. Then she did something I didn't expect. She leaned forward, her voice trembling, and admitted that maybe she had made a mistake leaving. She said she had been confused, that she thought she needed space, that she didn't realize how much she had taken for granted. Her words hung in the air like smoke, but her eyes betrayed her. This wasn't an apology. It was survival. I let her finish, then slowly walked to the door and opened it. I didn't say a word, just stood there, waiting. She froze, eyes wide, unsure if she should be angry, embarrassed, or desperate. In the end, she chose desperation. She stood, walked past me, and stopped in the doorway, as if expecting me to break and call her back. I didn't. The only sound was the click of the door closing behind her. For the first time, she realized something important. I wasn't the one chasing anymore. I wasn't the one waiting. I was the one leaving her out in the cold, and the silence I left her with was louder than any argument she could have won. The days after she walked out of my house were strangely quiet, almost peaceful. I expected anger, maybe more phone calls, some attempt to reclaim the ground she had lost. Instead, she went silent. But silence doesn't mean strength. Silence is what people use when they're recalculating. And sure enough, by the end of the week, her next move came, louder, more desperate. It started small. She left a bag of groceries on my porch. No note, just sitting there like an offering. I brought it inside, put everything away, and didn't reach out. The next morning, she texted to ask if I'd gotten them. I didn't respond. That silence hit harder than any rejection I could have spoken. The following day, she showed up again, not at the door this time, but at the gym where she knew I worked out. She stood by the entrance, waiting for me to see her, her posture stiff, her face painted with that careful smile she used when she wanted something. I walked past her without breaking stride. No words, no acknowledgement. She called my name once, twice. I didn't turn. By the time I came out an hour later, her car was gone. That was when her messages started flooding in. Not long paragraphs, just small hooks meant to reel me back in. Hope you're doing okay. I miss talking to you. Remember that trip we took to the lake? Each one was a thread, hoping I would grab hold. I didn't. I watched them pile up on my screen and disappear into nothing. Then came the first real crack in her mask. She showed up at my door again, but this time, she didn't dress for confidence. She was in a sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, eyes red. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't realized how much she depended on me until I was gone. She asked if we could talk about starting over. Her words might have fooled the old version of me, the man who thought love meant endless forgiveness. But I saw them for what they were, not remorse, but panic. She wasn't sorry for leaving. She was sorry that her new life didn't come with the comfort of my support. I let her talk, every word dripping with the desperation of someone losing ground. When she finished, I simply stepped back, crossed my arms, and said nothing. The silence pressed down on her harder than any lecture could have. She shifted, waiting for a reaction, but none came. Eventually, she left again, slower this time, like she was carrying the weight of something she couldn't shake. And I knew the truth had finally started to settle in. She wasn't in control anymore. The leash she once held so tightly had slipped from her hand, and I had no intention of ever picking it up again. It didn't take long for her to realize that silence wasn't just my weapon, it was my shield. She couldn't get through to me directly, so she started reaching for other angles. The first attempt came through her sister. Out of nowhere, I got a call one evening. Her sister's voice was light, almost rehearsed, as she asked how I was doing. She slipped in a few careful questions about whether I'd talked to her lately, whether I knew she was struggling. I answered each one with the same flat tone. I was fine. Yes, I knew. No, it wasn't my problem. The pause on the other end told me she wasn't expecting that. It was clear who had put her up to it. The next move was subtler. A mutual friend messaged me on social media with a casual, "Everything okay between you two?" Attached was a screenshot of one of her posts, some vague quote about regret and loneliness. It was bait. She wanted me to see it, to react, to chase. I didn't. I scrolled past like it was background noise. But the real shift came when she showed up again, not at my house, but at my workplace. I saw her car in the parking lot before I even stepped outside. She leaned against it, arms folded, as if this was some romantic reunion scene. But when she saw me, her confidence faltered. She said she just wanted 5 minutes, that she couldn't stand how distant I'd become. She asked if we could talk somewhere private. I told her there was nothing to talk about. My voice didn't rise. My expression didn't change. And that's when she broke the mask completely. Her voice cracked. She said she couldn't handle it anymore, that she needed me. She admitted she thought I'd always be there waiting, that I was the safe choice, the fallback. The word she used, fallback, was like gasoline on an open flame. I didn't respond. I walked past her, got into my car, and drove away. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. That night, the texts multiplied. Long paragraphs now, not short lines. She poured out everything. Apologies, excuses, memories she wanted me to relive with her. Each message tried a different angle: guilt, nostalgia, pleading. I read them all and answered none. What she didn't understand was simple. Love wasn't supposed to feel like a leash. Marriage wasn't supposed to be a contract where one person decides when the other matters. She thought I'd always orbit her, no matter how far she pushed me away. But now, as her messages turned from calculated to chaotic, she was finally realizing the truth. I wasn't in orbit anymore. I was already gone. By the time her messages turned into essays, I knew she was slipping from control into desperation. The same woman who once looked me in the eye and told me I was just convenient was now filling my phone with apologies, regrets, and promises. She didn't even realize that the more she wrote, the less it mattered. Every sentence was just confirmation that the balance had shifted forever. One evening, I came home to find her car parked outside my house again. The porch light caught her silhouette as she sat on the steps, waiting. For a moment, I stood at the end of the driveway, watching. She wasn't the confident version of herself I remembered. Her shoulders were slumped, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look smaller, diminished. When she saw me, she jumped up, her face lighting up with relief that didn't belong to someone in control. It belonged to someone losing. She tried to smile, tried to act casual, but her voice betrayed her. She said she just wanted to talk, that she missed the way things used to be. She reminded me of our early days together, the places we'd gone, the laughter we once shared. It was a performance, a last-ditch effort to pull me into nostalgia. But all I heard was emptiness. Those words meant nothing from someone who had already traded me for the illusion of freedom. I unlocked the door and stepped inside without inviting her. She followed me in, unasked, as if muscle memory gave her permission. She moved around the living room awkwardly, touching things that no longer belonged to her world. Her hand lingered on a framed photo I hadn't taken down yet. She whispered that she wanted to come home. That word, home, hung in the air like smoke. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. The silence stretched so long that she finally broke. Her voice cracked as she admitted she couldn't handle being on her own, that she'd miscalculated, that she thought I'd always be there when she needed me. It wasn't an apology. It was survival disguised as remorse. She wasn't mourning me. She was mourning the comfort, the safety, the foundation I had built under her feet. And now that it was gone, she wanted back in. When I finally looked at her, my expression didn't change. Calm. Detached. I told her nothing. I just stood up, walked to the door, and opened it wide. She froze, eyes watering, waiting for a different outcome. But there was nothing left to give. She walked out slowly, like she was dragging the weight of her own decisions with her. The door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was heavier than any fight we'd ever had. That night, I realized something permanent. She had finally tasted what it felt like to be invisible, and it was killing her. It didn't take long for her desperation to spill out into the open. When private pleas failed, she turned to performance. She began crafting a version of events where she wasn't the one who walked out, but the one who had been abandoned. I started hearing from people I hadn't spoken to in months, mutual friends, distant relatives, even colleagues who barely knew us. Each message carried the same undertone: concern for her, suspicion toward me. She had been busy rewriting the story. Online, she posted vague quotes about heartbreak, about being misunderstood, about strength through struggle. Photos of her sitting alone with wine glasses, captions that hinted at betrayal. I didn't need to guess who those were aimed at. She was painting herself as the victim, hoping to rally sympathy, hoping to corner me into responding. But silence is more powerful than accusation. I didn't defend myself. I didn't counter her narrative. I let her craft her story while I quietly lived mine. And the contrast became obvious. While she sought pity online, I focused on building a life offline. I reconnected with old friends. I picked up projects I'd abandoned years ago. I carried myself lighter, sharper, more focused. People noticed. They started to wonder why her words didn't match the man they saw in front of them. The breaking point came when her own mask slipped in public. She showed up at a mutual friends gathering, not knowing I'd be there. The moment she saw me, her composure cracked. She tried to corner me in front of everyone, voice trembling as she accused me of being cold, of turning my back on her when she needed me most. The room fell silent. All eyes were on us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just looked at her calmly and asked one question: "Didn't you leave?" The words landed like a hammer. The silence that followed wasn't mine this time. It was the crowd's. Heads turned toward her, waiting for her to explain. She froze, her mouth opening, but no words coming out. The sympathy she had been building drained in an instant, replaced by something colder: judgment. I didn't stay to watch her unravel further. I set my drink down, thanked the host, and left without another word. That exit said everything I needed it to. From that night on, the pity she once attracted turned into whispers she couldn't control. Her attempt to make me the villain had backfired. She wasn't the woman who left for freedom anymore. She was the woman left standing alone, clutching a story no one believed. And I never had to raise my voice to make it happen. By the time her public act collapsed, the shift was irreversible. The same woman who once looked at me like I was wallpaper was now the one chasing shadows, trying to reclaim something that no longer existed. She dropped the last pieces of pride she had left and started reaching out without disguise. Her messages weren't vague anymore. They were pleas. She said she was sorry. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't understand how I could be so cold. She begged for a chance to talk face to face, to fix what she had broken. I read every word in silence. I didn't block her, but I didn't reply. Letting her watch her own desperation echo unanswered was more powerful than erasing her voice completely. And the more I ignored her, the more frantic she became. She started calling again, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the middle of the day, leaving long voicemails where her voice cracked and her words stumbled over themselves. She tried every angle: apology, nostalgia, anger, guilt. None of it mattered. Then came the moment that confirmed what I already knew. She had nothing left. One evening, as I was coming home from work, I found her waiting in the driveway. She wasn't dressed for performance this time. No makeup, no careful presentation. Just a woman stripped of her illusions, standing small against the cold. She said she was lost. She said she couldn't handle life on her own. She whispered that she wanted to come home. Home. That word again. The same place she had walked away from when she thought she could do better. Now it wasn't a sanctuary. It was a lifeboat she wanted to climb back into after setting it on fire. I didn't invite her in. I didn't argue. I told her nothing. I simply unlocked the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me, leaving her outside in the silence she had chosen months ago. Through the window, I saw her sit down on the steps, her shoulders shaking as the night pressed in. I didn't move to comfort her. I didn't open the door again. Because the truth was clear. She hadn't come back for me. She had come back for the version of herself she lost when she thought I was just convenient. And that man, the one who built her comfort, carried her weight, forgave her indifference, no longer existed. What stood in his place was someone she couldn't touch anymore. Not with apologies. Not with tears. Not with desperation. And for the first time, she finally understood what it meant to be invisible. By the time winter set in, her life was unraveling piece by piece. Word had spread. Friends who once praised her independence now avoided the subject entirely. Family members who used to defend her choices began calling me instead, their voices cautious, almost apologetic. They had finally seen the truth she had tried to bury beneath half-truths and carefully staged photos. And the truth was simple. She had gambled everything on the idea that I would always be there. She was wrong. I didn't need to dig for details. Her unraveling showed itself in small, accidental ways. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she had moved out of her apartment, too expensive to maintain. Someone else told me she'd been borrowing money, making excuses about late payments and bad luck. She had built her new life on the fantasy of freedom without responsibility, and now that fantasy had collapsed. One evening, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a handwritten letter, the kind people write when words over the phone are no longer enough. The sentences were uneven, ink smudged where her hand must have shaken. She admitted she had nothing left. She admitted she had made a mistake. She begged me not to erase her from my life completely. I read it once, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't burn it. I didn't rip it. I simply placed it in a drawer and closed it. Out of sight, out of mind. Her words no longer had the power to move me, because they weren't written for me. They were written for the version of me she had destroyed the moment she said I was just convenient. That week, I closed the last doors she could have used to reach me. I changed my number. I cleared out the last shared accounts, making sure there were no strings left for her to pull. I deleted her from every contact, every thread, every trace that connected her name to mine. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. She had walked away because she didn't want to touch me. Now, she couldn't reach me at all. I didn't announce it to anyone. I didn't post about it, didn't make it public. The silence itself was the ending. And that silence was louder than any argument, any dramatic goodbye. When people asked how I was doing, I told them the truth, better than ever. And it wasn't a performance. I felt lighter, sharper, more alive than I had in years. I had cut away the dead weight of someone who once mistook my devotion for convenience. And as her world shrank, mine expanded. I wasn't her shadow anymore. I was my own man again. The final break wasn't a loud explosion. It was a whisper, a quiet closing of doors she never thought would shut. By then, I had erased every trace of her from my daily life. The house no longer carried her fingerprints. The photos were gone, the routines rewritten, the silence no longer heavy but freeing. I didn't wake up thinking about her. I didn't go to bed replaying what she had done. I simply lived. She, on the other hand, couldn't escape it. The call stopped not because she didn't want to make them, but because there was nothing left for her to say. The people who once believed her version of events now kept their distance, wary of her contradictions. The sympathy she'd sought had run dry, leaving only whispers behind her back. And in those whispers, her story had already been written. She had walked away from stability, and she had been replaced by silence. I heard through a friend of a friend that she had moved in with a relative, still telling half-truths about how things ended. I didn't react. She could bend the narrative all she wanted. What mattered was that she was doing it alone. I didn't need to prove anything. I had nothing to defend. My absence was proof enough. The last time I saw her was by chance, at a grocery store late one evening. She looked smaller somehow, weighed down by her own choices. For a moment, her eyes met mine, searching for recognition, for a crack in the armor, for any sign that I might still be the man who once waited for her. I gave her nothing. Not anger, not warmth, just silence. I pushed the cart past her and didn't look back. That was the moment it became real, not just for her, but for me. She finally saw what it meant when a man no longer belongs to her world. She finally understood that walking away wasn't just a temporary act, but a permanent fracture. I left that store lighter than I had walked in. Not because I had won anything, but because I had finally left the past exactly where it belonged. And as for her, she was left with what she had chosen months ago. The silence she thought she wanted. The freedom she believed would fill her. Except now, it wasn't silence she could control. It was the kind that echoed. The kind that pressed against her until she had to face it alone. I never raised my voice. I never begged. I never chased. I simply stepped back and let her feel the weight of her own decisions. She wanted distance. She got it. Forever. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.